breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast with Lizzie Green and Joe Crowley. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Justice Matters Pod for clips. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of murder and rape. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, Lizzie.
Hello, Joe.
Still in our new studio. Newish.
I know. I hope the listeners were okay with last week's recording.
Yeah. Certainly the black background sort of fits in with the topic from last week, which was the Falconio murder.
Yes, the desert night.
Yes, which is a gruesome... Well, we don't know how Peter Falconio died because he'd never been found, but...
I'm sure it wasn't pleasant.
No, incredibly scary for Joanne Lees, the victim.
I know, I've been wondering all week how this was going
How
to
does it end?
pan out.
Yes, well, as I said, I had read a book called... Well, sorry, I didn't. I listened to it on Talking Book and then tried to get a hard copy, which is still in transit, either that or I've been ripped off, by Sue Williams, the author, and Then the Darkness, which I quite like the name, And Then the Darkness.
Yes.
Anyway, fits in with a black background. So just to recap, for those who haven't heard episode 1, you could probably listen to this episode. We'll recap it enough that you could just keep listening, but obviously we encourage you to go back and listen to episode 1.
A lot more detail in the full episode.
Yes.
Peter
Falconio and Joanne Lees, some 20-somethings in Australia doing a driving around Australia holiday. They're British backpackers. They're in a lovely little orange combi on the long straight road from Alice Springs to Darwin, more on the Alice Springs end. They are in the middle of the night, 8 o'clock at night. They are signalled to pull over by another driver because of problems with their car. They pull over. Peter Falconio is standing at the back of the combi with this other driver. There's a loud bang, which sounds like the backfire of a car, says Joanne Lees, and she never sees Peter again. She then, over the next sort of 20 minutes or 30 minutes, is then tied up by this guy. Assaulted. And she's in fear of her life, I think rightly, and in fear that she's going to be raped. She very bravely manages at some point to run off into the bush and hide. And whoever this guy is, he never finds her. And he eventually leaves. She flags down a big road train and she's taken off to the nearest service station at Barrow Creek. And then this huge police manhunt begins, which then doesn't really amount to anything for almost a year. Well, actually, I think over a year. And so the evidence that they have to go on is the description of the car, which is of a white utility Toyota Land Cruiser with a green canopy. They also have a description of the man, which she gives, which is I think she initially says a short man, but he has what she describes as a Mexican-style moustache, which is a long moustache coming down past his mouth. Quite distinctive. He wears a cap and a long-sleeve shirt over a T-shirt, which... pretty common. Yeah. Sort of a flannel over a T-shirt. He has a dog sitting in the car, which she describes as a cattle dog. They find what's called a truck stop video, which is a video at a truck stop within sort of 100 or so Ks of the area where the abduction and murder took place, with a man who you never see his face, but the description and the way that he walks and the way that he moves is said to be Bradley Murdoch, match for Bradley Murdoch, who's the man they eventually arrest. And they get a spot of blood off Joanne Lees's T-shirt that she was wearing. So she's not a spot of blood, it's a sort of a smear of blood. Yeah. Must be pretty small, anyway. And they match that with the DNA of the man they eventually arrest, Bradley Murdoch. Oh. They get an exact match. I said that in the last episode.
I didn't know it was blood. I thought it was off the zip ties, like from touching the zip ties.
So they get the zip ties as well, and they do get some DNA, but they can't properly test it. So they send it to London and they do a LCN test, a low copy number test, which was brand new at that stage and has subsequently ruled to be terribly unreliable.
Oh, really?
It's not automatically inadmissible in Australian courts now, but...
Is it questioned?
Big question marks over it.
But so...
And they don't get an exact match off the zip ties. They get a partial match off the zip ties.
So, where was he bleeding from?
Yeah, good question. Who knows? And so that's the evidence. The other evidence. Bradley Murdoch is a person of interest, I think, because he has a white utility, which is a Toyota Land Cruiser. I think one of the reasons the police interview him and then sort of discount him, one of the reasons is because his car looks different because it's got now it's got a metal or a canopy on it, not a canvas one. But he had made, as I said in the last episode, when Bradley Murdoch arrived home from one of his drug runs, because he was a drug runner in the area.
Stand up, fellow.
Yeah, when I say in the area, I mean, we're talking about thousands of square kilometres.
Yes.
Area. He had immediately shaved off his moustache and his hair, shaved his head, and completely altered the look of his car.
Yeah.
Which is taken as evidence against him.
Which I think is fair.
Yeah. So he is arrested, put in jail, on remand.
So refuse bail.
Refuse bail. Sorry. Actually finding him is a bit difficult. So they decide they want to arrest Bradley Murdoch because his drug running partner, who he'd had a falling out with, Heppy, had told the police that he thought that Bradley Murdoch was the man in the truck stop video.
Did Heppy avoid police trouble himself?
No, Heppy didn't avoid police trouble himself. So I think I said in the last episode, when they had fallen out, Bradley Murdoch had dobbed Heppy in as being a drug runner or something. Police had raided, and in the course of that, Heppy had said, "Oh, have I got some news for you?" and said that he thinks that Bradley Murdoch was the man who committed the murder of Peter Falconio or involved in it. And one of the reasons he says that is because he says Bradley Murdoch was the man in the truck stop video, and he said Bradley Murdoch admitted to being the man in the truck stop video.
Yeah, which is amazing evidence if it's true.
Yeah. So that video, I should have said, was taken within a couple of hours of the disappearance of Peter Falconio, within a couple of 100 Ks. So the person in the video could potentially, in terms of physically, have been that person because he was in the area.
Yes. Sorry, and one question. So obviously they couldn't see on that truck stop video the license plate.
Couldn't see the license plate, but they could see the car and it fit the description. White Toyota Land Cruiser utility with a green canopy.
The description Joanne gave.
Yes.
Which no longer matched Murdoch's car when they spoke to him.
No, it's still a white Land Cruiser utility, but now it has a metal canopy or something like that.
Interesting.
One of the other ways they connected is they know how much the guy paid for fuel. And he obviously had long-range fuel tanks because he buys more fuel than would fit in a standard tank of a Toyota Land Cruiser.
Did he pay by card?
No, he paid cash.
The drug money.
Well, if it's Bradley Murdoch, but we don't know. So, and Bradley Murdoch had long-range fuel tanks. But again, I just don't think that's particularly strong evidence. No. I know so many people who have long-range fuel tanks on their car.
2 of the cars at my house have long-range
fuel tanks. There you go.
Yeah.
Is one of them a white Toyota Land Cruiser?
No, it's a silver.
Silver. Oh, that's
Prado.
Right. Silver Prado.
And a Mitsubishi Challenger.
Oh, an old Challenger. So they arrest Bradley Murdoch. Now, what happens is they don't know where he is because he leaves Broome and Heppy doesn't know where he is. And so they've got to put out a sort of an APB, all points bulletin. We are looking for Bradley Murdoch.
Yeah.
By this stage, Bradley Murdoch is living in a shed or outhouse or, at another person's house in rural South Australia.
Oh, okay.
And he's running a drug operation from there.
Oh, God.
And he's getting the local guy who's renting him the room to help him pack the drugs and pays him some money for that, pays him some rent. Anyway, that guy has a wife or a de facto and a 12-year-old daughter.
Oh, Lord.
I should probably say gets a bit
unpleasant
from here. Trigger warning. So Bradley Murdoch, he is arrested by the South Australian police, but he's arrested for abduction of the mother and the daughter and rape of the daughter.
Oh, totally separate.
Totally separate.
Wow.
So abduction
and rape of both the mother and the daughter?
No, just the daughter, but abduction of the mother and the daughter.
Okay.
So the story is that the daughter was helping Bradley Murdoch in his little demountable house.
With the drugs?
No, with something else I can't remember. I think she used to go and help do his dishes or something, or wash his clothes, or
Okay.
anyway. And she then said he then trapped her and raped her, and then he then got her and her mother, forced them both into the back of his utility, lying on a mattress, and then drove, for hundreds or so k's, and then let them out at a service station in the middle of nowhere, and then kept driving.
What?
So that's the story that the mother and the daughter told. So Bradley Murdoch is arrested he's arrested when he stops at in a town and goes to the local grocery store to buy groceries, and they see his number plate and they have a big police cordon when he comes out and they arrest him. He is then in South Australia and he's put on trial for the rape of the 12-year-old and the abduction of the mother and the 12-year-old daughter. And so that delays proceedings, obviously, for the murder charge that he's facing in Darwin for Peter Falconio.
He's been charged by...
Charged, correct.
Okay, but given bail?
Well, I mean,
He must have been.
Must have been.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not, I mean, he's in jail in South Australia, so he's not going anywhere.
No, but if he had been remanded in custody when he was charged with Falconio's murder, he may not have been able to do the rape.
Oh, sorry, they hadn't. So the first time he comes to the attention of the authorities is when he is in jail in South Australia for the...
Oh, he hadn't already been charged?
No, they were looking for him.
Okay.
To arrest him, to charge him.
All right.
He stands trial in South Australia for those, and he's acquitted on all charges.
What?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, his argument is, I'm not sure he gives evidence, but his argument is that there's an APB out for him. Everybody, his picture's in the paper as to this is the man we're looking for. And we think he's responsible for and there was a reward posted for help us find this man. And Bradley Murdoch's story was that the mother and the daughter want to collect the reward. And so they make up this story and they... and he gets arrested.
Why would they have to make up a story? They could just ring and say he's living in our backyard.
Okay. Well, the jury, I don't know whether he gave evidence, but the jury certainly heard the mother and the daughter give their evidence, were not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, and acquit Bradley Murdoch.
So do we know, was there medical evidence of the rape?
No, I don't think there was any medical evidence of the rape.
I feel like that's an interesting verdict.
Well... So he is then he doesn't get out of jail in South Australia, he's then immediately rearrested before he gets out of jail.
Right.
And sent to Darwin.
Northern Territory.
The Northern Territory, yeah. I've actually done one of those rearrest extradition cases, and you don't even get out of the jail. It's not like they let you out the front door and then rearrest you. They rearrest you in the jail.
Well, I think that's probably sensible.
Probably, I suppose. You don't want someone doing a runner down the street.
Correct.
So they take him to the front office and they then go, well, you're free to go. And then meanwhile, there's some police from another state standing there who go, and now you're under arrest. Yeah. So anyway, he's extradited to Darwin. He then faces the trial for the murder of Peter Falconio.
So did they charge him simultaneously with charges relating to Joanne?
Yes, so the murder's the main charge, but then there is the abduction and assault.
All in one trial?
All in one trial.
Okay.
Against Joanne. I mean, that's understandable. And
sensible. I just was checking. Yeah.
So the trial's not until 2003. But they picked Bradley Murdoch up in about October 2002. So that's more than a year after the Peter Falconio goes missing. So I said Joanne Lees, the main witness, she had been living in Alice Springs for a few months and helping the police. Then she had moved back to Sydney, which I said in the first episode. She had lived in Sydney for a few months and had worked at Dimmock's bookstore in George Street in the Sydney city. And so she goes back there and works there for a few months. But eventually, the trail peters out, no pun intended, in terms of police being able to find somebody and being able to find Peter's body, and so she obviously wants to be home, and her mother is quite ill, and so she ends up going back to England.
Okay. So was there like an extensive ground search?
Massive ground search.
Okay.
Exactly how well I searched, I think, is under question, because in the first episode, you'll remember I said that when she escapes from this man on the side of the highway, she's got her hands tied in zip ties,
yes,
or cable ties, they call them. And after the man's left and she's in the bush, she tries to get the cable ties off. And one of the things that she does is she gets her lip balm out and she puts lip balm all over her wrists and then tries to slip the cable ties over her hands, but she can't. And she dropped her lip balm. Well, on the initial search, which is supposed to be an incredibly thorough search, they don't find the lip balm. But they do find the lip balm when a couple of senior officers go out, how many months later, in October, so July, August, September, 3 months later, some of the senior officers go out just to walk over the scene, not even doing a proper search, and they find the lip balm.
Okay, that's a concern.
It is a concern, isn't it? I mean, that's helpful in that I said in the last episode that the media, in some sections of the media, particularly the British media, really turned against Joanne and started writing stories about how she had made it up. And one of the things that they sort of focus on is this idea of it's probably a minor thing. One of the things that really obsesses them is this idea that Joanne says that she had her hands tied behind her back, but when she's found, by the man driving the cattle train, she has her hands at her front. And they say, well, there's no way that you could do that maneuver. You can't get your hands from behind you to in front of you. And they get a ballerina who's very flexible and they zip tie her hands and they get her, and she says, I can't do it. And they write all this up in the paper.
Okay. So I was watching John Wick last weekend.
Okay.
Not by
slow
choice.
Weekend by the sound
So
of it.
violent.
Yeah, very violent.
He did that exact thing.
Did he?
Was zip tied behind, whipped his legs through and was able to start fighting.
Keanu Reeves is awesome.
He is awesome.
Well, Joanne was able to do that because the space between her hands was large enough that she could sort of step through.
And I also would like to suggest that the ballerina was not experiencing the same feelings of desperation and
impending death.
Correct. So, you hear those stories of parents who lift a car or can do superhuman things in the face of danger.
Yeah.
Who's to say you can't contort yourself
to get through?
Yeah.
Well, I think when you're tied up in the way that Joanne Lees was, it is possible because the connection between her two hands was quite wide.
Yeah, I think that's not a...
and in fact, at trial, she demonstrated it for the jury.
Oh, good on her.
Yeah. But as I said, the media, because I didn't have anything to write about, she did end up giving an interview, but it was I think she just read a prepared statement, and she was very reluctant to interact with the media, including giving pictures. She would make sure she, was taken in through side doors and stuff, so they couldn't even get photos of her. And so the media were getting cranky with her, and then some of the media were writing stories that she was probably involved, and that obviously the relationship between her and the media deteriorated further.
So you drew a comparison last week to Lindy Chamberlain.
Yes.
And a lot of the criticism on Lindy Chamberlain was that she wasn't reacting how a mother should. Was it a similar kind of feeling?
Yes. So similar thing. They said Joanne wasn't reacting as she was supposed to.
Who makes those
and
rules?
You'll love this one. They commented on that she wasn't wearing appropriate clothes.
Sorry?
So she would turn up to, wearing sort of, skin tight singlets and
meaning
pink
what?
I don't know. I'm just telling you.
I'm not blaming you.
No,
but what was the media trying to make?
Well, they're saying it's just inappropriate that she was dressing like this, and very much.
She'd left her nun's habit at home,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes.
Oh,
so,
my God.
Yeah.
Women just are unable to do anything.
Well, I'm not defending the behaviour. I think it's pretty terrible. But if you've got an editor screaming down the phone saying, "Get me some copy," we're paying for you to be in another country to get stories, not to sit around doing nothing.
I am yet to read a story where what a male victim, witness, whatever, what they were wearing had any bearing at all on anything.
Yeah.
And yet in 2024, it still happens for women.
Yeah. Well, this was 2020.
I know, but I'm saying it still happens.
Yeah. So, so there's not much happening. Then they find Bradley Murdoch and they arrest him, and it gets published in the paper. And this becomes, so I said in the last episode, the case against him is entirely an identification case. He says the person who kills Peter Falconio and assaults Joanne Lees was not me. Okay, so
the only thing he can say.
It's just you couldn't really say I did it accidentally or
That's
something.
Right.
Yeah, I was acting in self-defense. Yeah,
Yes.
None of those sort of excuses work. But so he just says it wasn't me. So the entire case has to be about, is he the man who does this? So the identification evidence is a number of things. One of them is the eyewitness identification by Joanne Lees. Now, eyewitness identification is notoriously unreliable. And the law knows this, and juries are given warnings about relying on eyewitness testimony. The problem is eyewitness testimony is very powerful because people in the street think that eyewitness evidence is really reliable, but in fact it is totally unreliable. Well, not totally, but it's very unreliable.
That's right. And a juror who's listening would be like, yeah, I could remember what I saw.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, particularly in a case where you say it wasn't me, it's hard to, in terms of a piece of theatre, in terms of it persuading people, you have a young woman who is clearly distressed, in the witness box, giving a very powerful and very emotional story. I mean, I found it an emotional story, and I was listening to it on Talking Book 23 years later. So hearing her sit in the witness box and tell the story, I think, would be very powerful. And so your automatic instinct as a human, I think, is to relate to that.
Yes.
And you automatically think, well, this is terrible. We need someone to blame for this horrible thing that what this poor young woman's gone through. And all Bradley Murdoch's response to that is, it wasn't me. And that's not much of a compelling response in the face of very compelling sort of evidence against you.
And so I hesitate to ask,
yes,
because I know your opinion on this. But did they do like a photo board ID?
Okay, so I'm getting to the ID part. Oh, roll up your sleeves. I love a good identification case, I must say. All right, so Joanne Lees she was working in England, but again, she was being sort of, not hounded, but people recognised her in England asking for her autograph. And so she was finding it difficult to sort of return to normal life. So she was in Sicily. I'm not sure what she was doing, maybe having a holiday. And also, sections of the British media had been very against her, which was obviously tough. It'd be tough to read. And into October 2002, she gets contacted by some of her friends who say, the British media have written some really positive things about you. You should read the articles. Now, she was aware that the Northern Territory Police had arrested a suspect, and I think that she was also aware that there was a DNA match.
Did they publish his photo?
Yes. So she looks in the paper. She says to find the story that's positive to her, because what happens is they catch a man, they have positive identification. A whole lot of the media who said maybe Joanne Lees is involved in this come out and say, we were wrong. We're very sorry. She's obviously telling the truth. Yeah. She's telling the truth.
Wow.
Poor young thing. So she was looking to read this article that was sort of
vindicating.
Yeah. And opens the paper, boom, photo of Bradley Murdoch. Now she says, that's him. Immediately sees it and says, that's him. Now that evidence is objected to at trial because the idea is that she, of course, predisposed to identify whoever the paper says is the person who's been arrested.
Yeah.
For the same reason that courts have disallowed evidence where a police officer goes up to the victim with, having somebody in handcuffs with them and says, is this the guy?
Yes.
And the witness goes, yeah, that's him. Totally inadmissible because you were obviously predisposed to say yes when you think, the police have done their job.
Someone's cuffed.
Yeah. And so what they're supposed to do is a photo board where they give you sort of 12 or 16 or 24 faces and you then choose the one out of those faces as you think it is. So she's in Sicily. She identifies this photograph. A week later, she's back in England. She goes to the local police station. Northern Territory police officers come there with a photo board. She does the photo board. She again picks out Bradley Murdoch.
The Northern Territory police got to go to the UK.
Got to go to the UK. Wouldn't you love that trip?
Doesn't happen often.
No. So she picks him out twice from a photo board. Now, the defence objects.
Same photo?
No. The photo in the newspaper in Italy was a shot of Bradley Murdoch walking along the street, but it was a sort of a close-up sort of shot of his face.
Did he have the moustache?
No, he doesn't have the moustache and he doesn't have the hair. This is the thing.
Okay.
And then the photo that in the photo board is obviously a mugshot photo, but all of the photos in the photo board are mugshot photos. So.
But still no moustache or...
Still no moustache or long hair.
Can I just ask one other question? I was thinking.
Yeah.
So what about... so you were saying the British media took against her a bit.
Yeah.
What was Falconio's family? Were they against her or did they believe her?
No, they always believed her as well.
Okay.
So Peter had two brothers and obviously a mother and a father. The mother, I think, was too ill to travel. The father and one of the brothers came to Australia and stayed for, a couple of months. And they were completely the opposite to Joanne in that they were very happy to talk to the media and regularly gave interviews and were happy to stop and answer questions and have photos taken. And so in that sense, it was a bit of a, juxtaposition with...
They hadn't gone through the trauma.
No. I don't want to be critical. I mean, it would... I could imagine having to retell your story to the media would be horrific as well, and re-traumatising.
And the fear of them twisting your words or picking on, did you smile when you said something? That's what they do.
Yeah. So
they supported her.
They supported her, absolutely, yeah.
Right, so come back to the photo board.
Okay, so she picks him out from the photo board. Now, both those pieces of evidence go before the jury, despite the objection of the defence.
Okay.
That she picked him out from the photo board and she picked him out from the paper. There's a third piece of identification evidence that goes before the jury, and that is the doc identification. And as a lawyer, you will know that doc identifications are really not good. You're not supposed to do them. And for those listening or watching, a doc identification is where the victim is sitting in the witness box giving evidence, and they are asked questions like, do you see the person who did it in court today? And they then point to the person sitting in the dock and say, it was him. Very powerful piece of theatre. Very powerful piece of theatre. But notoriously unreliable because, again, you are predisposed to just point to whoever's sitting in the dock and say it was him or her.
And our court system in Australia is not theatrical.
Well, there is an element of theatre in court. You have to appreciate that. I mean, occasionally...
storytelling.
Yeah.
I think it's being able to engage
the
members of the court. But it's not the striding around the courtroom or grand gestures anything like that. No,
that's true. But you can still, there isn't, I think I run trials and I always appreciate there's an element of theatre in what you're doing. And, sometimes there's nothing like a good bang on the bar table about some point that you're trying to emphasise or some... You
would not get away with much
pointing.
of that,
I've done some aggressive pointing in my time and,
Have you?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's not the prosecution way.
I've seen prosecutors do it. So, there is an element of theatre. You are trying to convince the jury and the judge of your point. So you can't just deliver all your information in a monotone way.
No,
the way
it's
you deliver
definitely
it is
more about your oral engagement rather than theatre as people might picture.
Sure,
I think we have to be clear. We're not flouncing around and,
No, absolutely
and pointing
not.
to this and
No. But I mean, if you, as I say, if Joanne Lees is sitting in the witness box and they say,
yes,
and in fact there is an element of theatre to it because they say that, ask the question, can you see that man in the court today or whatever? And she says, yes, he's sitting in the dock or something like that. I don't think she sort of points at him. But when she does that, he shakes his head as in no. And she says, yes, it was you or something like that.
Wow.
In a very pointed way. I mean, that's very powerful.
She's a very strong young woman.
Yeah. So by the time she came back for the trial, she had changed her attitude to the media a bit and they had softened. I mean, I think because they had apologised effectively for not all of them. I think there was one guy still saying a few question marks over what she was saying.
Really?
But and she was much more prepared to give interviews and certainly much more prepared to be photographed. So she wouldn't arrive. So for the committal hearing, she'd be taken in the side door and they couldn't get photographs. They're getting really cranky. For the trial, she came along, she walked through the front door of the court and came out the front door of the court and was allowed herself to be photographed.
But it maybe felt safer and also maybe there was the time since that had lapsed,
Yeah.
Mm.
So those three pieces of identification go before the jury. I am sceptical
That's
of all
actually
of them.
amazing.
Yeah. Can I just digress because it reminded me of a case of Ronald Cotton. I don't know if you remember that case. It's an American case. It's one of the, I think it's certainly a DNA exoneration. It might be an Innocence Project one or it might have been before the Innocence Project. But so Ronald Cotton is an African-American man. He is arrested for the rape of Jennifer Thompson and put in jail, and he does 10 years, 11 years in jail. The only evidence against him, I think there's sort of some opportunity evidence, and there's this really quasi-scientific evidence about the rubber on his shoe and some rubber, mark on the floor or some palaver. Anyway, but the main evidence against him is the victim, Jennifer Thompson. Again, it's a horrible case, so trigger warning to people. So she's a, young college student. She's at college in her room one night, and a man, again, worst nightmare, a man climbs through her window with a knife
Wow.
So she thinks that she is
Going to
die. He rapes her. She thinks, again, amazingly strong young woman, she thinks, if I'm going to survive this, I definitely want to identify this guy. So she purposely sets out to burn into her memory what his face looks like. And so she is studying his face as much as she can. Anyway, she convinces him after she's been raped to get rid of the knife or something. So he gets rid of the knife. So she's, I think, probably feels she's not going to die.
Yes.
She then asks if he wants a glass of water, and he says yes. She goes, I'll get you a glass of water. And as she goes off to get a glass of water, she runs and she escapes. She goes to the police station. She does.
Sorry, just not the sharpest tool in the shed.
No, he's obviously not.
So tired and thirsty after the rape.
I mean, honestly. Yeah. So she does an identikit. So this is 85. So that is a book full of, different sets of ears and different sets of noses and eyes. And you sort of pick out the ears that match and the eyes that match, and then they put it together in an identikit.
Like Mr. Potato Head. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, that has scientifically been proved to be a terrible way to get people to identify people. But
what about sketch artists?
Slightly better, I think. But identikit's just a appalling way to do it. It's because the brain doesn't, when you look at someone's face, it's a holistic assessment. You don't go, look at the eyes, look at the ears. I mean, obviously some of our watchers look at your ears because you've had that comment.
Yes, about my lobes.
In our caustic comments. Anyway, so they put together an identikit, and it does look a bit like Ronald Ryan. Let's not quibble with that. Anyway, that's right. I think they had a photograph of him in a mugshot. I think had some petty crime. So they put together a photo board with his photo on it. She picks Ronald Ryan out. Then they do a police lineup a couple of days later, and she again picks Ronald Ryan out.
Okay.
But he's got different hair and a different sort of moustache than the guy she remembers. And she says, that's because he's trying to look different. And it makes her more convinced that he's the man. Anyway, she picks him out. She identifies him at trial, theatrical doc identification. He goes off to jail. While he's in jail, he meets a guy who looks a lot like the identikit picture.
Oh, no.
And starts asking questions. And that guy admitted to
the rape.
Correct. They then have a retrial. That guy recants on the stand, says, no, it wasn't me. Ronald Ryan's reconvicted, but writes to them and says, look, can you test my DNA? Because it's not me. Luckily, they had a DNA sample to test. They tested DNA. It wasn't him.
Why did they not test the DNA before the trial?
I think, it's 85, so DNA is not really a thing. He does, come to the early 90s, I think DNA is becoming a thing.
So they had taken a sample.
They had taken a sample. And then, yeah. So after 11 years, he's released. And Jennifer Thompson, who had 100% identified him, and in the second trial, when her actual perpetrator was sitting there, had gone, yes, not him, it's that guy. So her eyewitness identification was proven scientifically not to be valid.
Wow.
And despite her absolute 100% assurance that it was definitely Ronald Cotton.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's an example, and that seems to be the kinds of thing that, I'm not saying we do have that here, but I think you've got to be very skeptical of the eyewitness identification.
Yeah, I think humans are so fallible when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah. One of the other big ones is DNA. So there's what's called a wet blood stain or something on the front of Joanne Lees' shirt that is that they get a DNA reading off, and then they get later on Bradley Murdoch's DNA, and they say it's an exact match. I said exact match.
You don't like that.
I'm always skeptical of exact matches. Couple of problems with it. One, they say to the jury that it's like 10 trillion times likely that it's not him. And they give these ridiculous statistics.
That it is him.
They always give the statistics in the negative. So 10...
That it's not
that
a
it
match.
Could have been someone else or some, give it, it's such a confusing. I mean, nowadays they can't give statistics like that. The court says you can't give those. You can't say it like that. You've got to say it in a more comprehensible, sensible way.
Yeah.
But also, it's just a statistical...
probability.
But it can't possibly be true, because if you're giving it in the trillions, well, there's only 7 billion humans, so it couldn't ever be more than that, could it?
Well, it's the permutations.
I know, but it might be mathematically correct, but it's not. The practical reality of it is it couldn't be correct. And in fact, it couldn't be correct because there isn't 7 billion people in Barrow Creek on that night. So again, you have to then account for the people who actually had the opportunity to do it.
Okay, but I think what it's saying is how
sure, we'll come out and say it.
Reliable.
Well, the problem is you're giving these statistics to lay people. They're not scientists. They're not lawyers. They haven't dealt with these kind of numbers before. They haven't dealt with these statistics before. And as I say, you're not allowed to give statistics like that anymore. This is in 2003. So that's how they give. I just would have immediately objected and said it's just ridiculous. But the other thing,
would you in 2003 have objected?
Yeah, probably. I would have had a crack at it. I mean, anybody who knows any basic things about statistics and the population of the Earth would know that statistic has to be wrong.
If that was such a common way of phrasing DNA results,
sure,
you maybe wouldn't have taken objection.
I would have absolutely taken objection. Just mathematically, I would have taken objection.
Ahead of your time, Joe.
Well, but I mean, just mathematically it doesn't work. I mean, mathematically it does work. It doesn't work in practical reality. It's just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to say.
All right. So you object to that.
Object to that. But the other thing we know now, which I don't think they knew then, is that you've got to account for the difference in race. So, African Americans' DNA at certain alleles in the DNA strand I think it's the reaction between or the likelihood between. So what they do is usually they do 9, but in this case they did 16. We've got 16 places on the DNA helix, which we can match between the sample we've got from Joanne's shirt and between Bradley Murdoch's, and they match. I.e., at allele number 1, it's the same as allele number 1 on Bradley Murdoch's. What that assumes is that each one of those 16 alleles, they're completely independent of each other. They don't. So, like if allele number 1, if it has a relationship to allele number 2, so if you're likely to get, if you get a 1, or an A at allele number 1, you're more likely to get a B at allele number 2 because there's a relationship between them. But when you do these statistical probabilities that come out into the billions and trillions, you're assuming that each one of those alleles is completely independent of the other. And they know now you can't do that because if you get a A at one particular point, you're more likely to get a B at the next point. So,
all right. That's all very complex.
Also, different races have different relationships between the alleles. So the statistical probability is different.
Well, and the whole testing of it has advanced.
Oh, yeah.
Substantially since 2003.
Yes, substantially.
Yes.
So that's why I say when a scientist says there is an exact match, I'm like, really? That sounds very unscientific to me.
All right. But so there was a match.
There was a match. They then do the low copy number. So they've got the
UK.
Yeah, so they've got the smear on of sort of wet blood. Again, which sounds like a strange sort of way to get your thing to get you down. No. They then get the zip ties or the cable ties and they test them. And they did get some DNA, but they couldn't test it. It was too degraded or something. So they sent it to the UK to do this, what was then new, low copy number testing. And they then get a partial match, which is, they say is, only, 1 million times, that it's probably Bradley Murdoch or something. The problem with low copy number is because you're dealing with degraded DNA, the likelihood that you are getting a false positive is much, much higher.
Right.
And nowadays, although low copy number is not absolutely inadmissible in Australian courts, it's pretty, some real question marks over it. And, I've seen a paper written by a criminal court judge saying you've got to be really skeptical of low copy number stuff. So that goes in again. I mean, low copy number is not sort of known to be so weak back then.
No.
But they get the scientist there and he's apparently gave excellent evidence, which is all, again, part of the theatre building up this case.
Yes, okay.
And Happy gives evidence and says what a terrible guy Bradley Murdoch is and how he changed his hair in his car. And
crucified on the stand for his criminal activity?
I'm not really sure, but because Bradley Murdoch obviously was a drug runner as well, so
that's a dangerous door to open.
The pot calling the kettle black. But Bradley Murdoch, interesting, gives evidence, and by the sound of it, didn't do too bad. He acquitted himself reasonably well.
Affirm that it wasn't him.
So
what was the defence argument about the DNA?
Well, the defence argument about the DNA, I've told you the areas I would have attacked. The defence argument about the DNA is that it was contaminated. There was some contamination, or that Bradley Murdoch, who had been in Alice Springs with Joanne and Peter Falconio, they had somehow innocent transference. They'd somehow bumped into each other, I don't think it was great. I would have had a crack at them and crack at a few scientists.
I find that to be, very unconvincing.
Yeah. So, but what I was interested in is the police, and this is another red flag for me. They, if I was them, I would have gone, DNA, shut the gate, close the file, we've got enough, let's just go and work up some other trials. No, they are obsessed and they just keep trying to find evidence. I'm thinking, why are you doing that if you're so convinced? If the DNA is such a shut the gate, why are we even bothering with this?
So just to be devil's advocate,
sure.
If they had shut the gate after they got that DNA evidence, you would probably be sitting here right now saying, why did they stop then? Why didn't they keep going? And
well, they did have some stuff.
Very critical.
I am always very critical.
Police investigations.
Yes. That is absolutely true.
Yes.
As is my role. I mean, that's really what I'm supposed to do.
Well, I know, but it does a disservice.
I don't know about that.
Like, a different perspective is how amazing that these police were being very thorough.
Wow. I just think think the low copy number stuff and going to the United Kingdom. It's what a waste of time.
At the time,
they had a DNA match in Australia. Why didn't it? Apparently, it was an exact match.
They also sent the Chamberlain samples to the UK. Like, it was obviously something that they did. We came from the UK system. There's the feeling of...
I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with you. I'm sure the UK scientists are all very smart. We often send stuff now to New Zealand. There's apparently some great forensic lab in New Zealand.
So it's what is done at the time.
But if you have an exact match, why do you need to follow it with more DNA? You've got it, haven't you?
But they were looking at the zip tie DNA.
Sure, but you've got an exact match off a shirt.
Yeah, but they're ticking all the boxes. The shirt
this is public money
is different to the zip ties because maybe that innocent transference on a shirt is more explainable than zip tie.
Zip ties, sure.
Come on, Joe.
Okay.
You're being very unfair.
Okay. So they've got the ID, they've got the zip tie and the blood on Joanne's shirt.
Yes.
They've got the dog ID, which was, I said, the Bradley Murdoch's dog, which she did travel with in the front seat.
Did he come to court?
No. She did do a doggy photo ID.
Oh, did she?
I think she got that wrong, though.
Yeah.
Because his dog was a cattle dog Dalmatian cross, interesting cross, and she had seen what she described as a cattle dog.
I'm guessing that would have been quite a cute dog.
Yeah. The other thing is, we said in the first episode when Joanne Lees is in the bush and there's the man, whoever this guy is, who is Bradley Murdoch's been convicted of it, is out in the bush looking for her. His dog is sitting in the car, and I said, I'm surprised the dog didn't sort of go crazy or run around.
Especially if it's a cattle dog.
No, especially if it's a Dalmatian. They're mad as hatters. They run around like idiots.
Well, but cattle dogs are retrieve dogs, they're working dogs.
That's right. Yeah, why, put the dog out then. Yeah. Anyway, so I just found that interesting that, if it's a Dalmatian cattle dog cross, why isn't it just going nuts?
Mm. That's odd.
So,
unless he also was stoned.
So this is
the dog.
Yeah, well, that's right. Bit of hooch in the car. So one of the, so I said this car, this distinctive, white ute with a green canopy. I mean, we discussed how common white Land Cruiser utilities are because they're either white or beige, as you said. And I had a friend who lived in Darwin at the time. I was talking about the case with him recently, and he said he remembers when they were talking about this, and everyone's saying, "Well, that's not going to help because there are so many of those cars around."
Second car.
And in fact, within a few, that police cordon picked up a bloke who had a white Land Cruiser utility with a green canvas back.
Yeah.
Turns out it wasn't him. So,
How did they know?
Oh, I don't know. He had an alibi or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously Murdoch also didn't have an alibi.
Well, because he was on a drug run.
Yes.
Sure. He admitted to have been, he admitted that he had been in Alice Springs and he'd done the drive back to Broome. And part of that drive, or the route that he said he took, was in the area where this all occurred.
But so, I mean, if he'd had an alibi, like, why did he not have a drug deal at that time? Or is he... would have been handy.
Yeah, that's right. Sure, yeah. Maybe he didn't want to give up some of his drug people, but
oh well.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't think the idea of the car is particularly good, particularly strong.
And her conflicting evidence that she was pushed through to the tray.
Yeah, so
that's weird.
Yeah, so for the people who missed last episode, she says that at one point she's put into the front seat of the car with her hands behind her back, and that this bloke. Bradley Murdoch's been convicted of this. He sits in the driver's seat and he pushes her from the cab to the tray. And we were saying, it was what utility has an opening that big you could push someone from the cab to the tray?
No.
At trial, she conceded that maybe he'd pulled her out of the car and then pushed her through the side, of the tray and up into the car that way. So
the car's a bit problematic.
Yeah, and so they had this truck stop video identification. So the truck stop is within a couple of 100K and within a couple of hours. So the person in the truck stop video is potentially the murderer. Now, they say it's Bradley Murdoch, and I think the jury found that it was him in the video. So it's a man in a cap, so you can't see their face. He pulls up. He is in a white utility Land Cruiser with a green canopy, and he has long-range fuel tanks because he fills up with enough fuel.
Yep.
But he stays at the truck stop for quite a while and chats to the guy behind the counter. They have a good chat.
Yeah.
Such that the guy remembered, not to give a description, but remembered the bloke being in there. And he said that the guy was, fine in terms of his demeanour wasn't angry, or it wasn't sort of, it was just pretty normal. And that doesn't in some sense tally, because the person who abducts Joanne Lees apparently is quite angry, and he's barking orders at her, and he punches her at one stage, and obviously zip ties her. And he's swearing when she runs into the bush, and she can see him walking around. He's swearing and he's angry. And the description given by Heppy of Bradley Murdoch when he arrives back, days later in Broome, is that he's absolutely off his head on amphetamines because he's been doing this drive, and that he's really paranoid, and he's very angry, and he's agitated. So, those three descriptions of the behaviour of these, what are all supposed to be the same person, just doesn't really fit.
But it seems weird. Well, sorry, not weird, but maybe less convincing that shop attendant could remember the conversation so well, but had such a long chat, but couldn't remember what he looked like. He probably serves lots of people, and I think by the time he was asked, it was a couple of days later. Exactly. So how do we know it was the right person he remembered that conversation with? I think his evidence would be the least compelling.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't pinpoint who he was.
Yeah, okay. The other thing is, and I would have objected to this, so they get an expert in to give, sort of body movement evidence. So this became popular for a while, which I think has now been ruled completely inadmissible. And that is, you video somebody, you get a video from a CCTV, and you watch how they walk, get their gait, and then you get the person who you think it is, and you video how they walk, and then you compare the two, and you get an expert to say, yes, the person in the video is this person.
Yes.
I think that's subsequently ruled to be completely inadmissible.
Well, you say that, but I did read, and I don't know if it was John Grisham or James Patterson, but one of recent releases where there was that kind of analysis done.
Yeah. The problem is with these pieces of evidence is they come up with stuff and they say, oh, we can match these two. But what they need to do is do it scientifically properly. So they need to do controlled tests. So they need to video a person who they know it is. And then they need to, get 10 people, and then they need to video all 10 of those walking. And then they need to say to some expert, okay, which of those 10 is that person there? And then they need to do that test 20 times with the 20 different experts, and they need to work out how reliable it is. But they don't do that. They just have one expert who invents this and goes, oh, I can match it.
It's bringing me back to the dentist evidence from our Raymond Carroll case.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, so this guy gives this evidence. And again, this is, I think, quite, when you get a scientist sitting in the witness box giving this evidence, it's quite powerful to the jury. And, you combine that with, Joanne Lees' what I'm sure was quite powerful evidence. And, you get a few experts in saying this stuff. And all Bradley Murdoch says, it wasn't me, I wasn't there.
Well, and you said he wasn't a very likeable fellow.
Not a particularly likeable fellow, although I think he did give pretty good evidence. Okay. Joanne Lees certainly gave very good evidence. She was in the committal hearing, which is the preliminary hearing. She was very bad, apparently.
Were there inconsistent statements between the committal and the trial?
Yeah, her story was slightly different each time, but that's sort of understandable. But some of I couldn't find, when I read the appeal judgment, the discussions about her initially saying the bloke was short and Bradley Murdoch is quite tall.
Right.
So it
mustn't have been materially different. Like, it must have just been between like the inconsistencies are usually a big argument. Yeah. That's a big factor.
Yeah. I can only go off what I read in this book and then in the appeal judgment, so I don't know what was in the defence barrister's brief. But they didn't focus as... I would have just 100% run it as an identification case, whereas they sort of leaned in a bit to the credibility of Joanne Lees and should you believe her? I would have leaned more into, look, she could be mistaken, as opposed to, look, she's not credible. unless you say she's absolutely making it up, you've got to accept she's been through an horrific incident.
Yes.
And so you don't want to be seen as the guy who's,
calling her a liar.
Yeah. So I probably would have leaned into much more that she was mistaken. And the Ronald Cotton case is perfect. I mean, not that you could have sort of used it in that trial, but it demonstrates that people who make these identifications can absolutely be mistaken, and they believe they're telling the truth.
That's right. They're 100% convinced.
Yes, and so they can be very convincing.
Yeah.
So
it's, when they say listen for the ring of truth.
Oh, yeah.
They could have the ring of truth in their voice and still be wrong.
Yeah. And, when she looks at him, she identifies him in the doc identification and he shakes his head and she says, no, it was definitely you or whatever. That's very powerful for a jury to see. And she could have been wrong, as Jennifer Thompson was in the Ronald Cotton case.
Mm.
So
you said you were coming around to believing he was?
The DNA look is hard to get around. It wasn't attacked as thoroughly as I would have liked to have seen it attacked. And sorry, to some extent, I say that 22 years later when we've had a lot more experience with DNA evidence and we've just had a DNA inquiry in Queensland to show how fallible it is. So I can't, I don't want to throw too much shade on the defence at Bradley Murdoch's trial. That's hard to get around. The rest of it, I think there's some question marks over. And I must say, I think some of it would be inadmissible. I mean, it was taken on appeal, I should say, and the appeal court upheld the trial judge's reasonings. But,
But so, gut instinct, do you think he did it?
Oh, I don't like it. I don't know. There's certainly some evidence against him. Enough evidence to put him on trial. I can't see any evidence of police misconduct like you can sometimes see in these cases.
Yes. But
perhaps, the desire to get a conviction would have been very strong. International media, nothing's happened for months and months and months. You've got no leads. Finally, you sort of get something you can sink your teeth into. The desire to get that conviction, which might push you in a particular direction, push you to focus too hard on a person, I think would have been very strong.
But so at no stage were you aligned with the media who thought Joanne was involved?
No, absolutely not. I'm sure she was telling the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, she obviously went through a horrific incident.
Yes.
But I think there's a possibility that the person who did it is still out
there.
A
documentary made on this?
I think 60 Minutes. Interestingly, there was only one book. Usually there's a couple of books. Only one book, if anyone wants to write a book on it. So now Joanne Lees living quietly in a small town in England where she grew up, working, I think, in social services.
So many of these cases, you think of that sliding doors moment where if Peter had said, all right, we'll keep driving, rather than pulling over.
Because there was an earlier case where a girl was driving along, she's driving, car pulls up beside a similar sort of car, guy sort of menaces her, bloke who she's travelling with in the back seat sleeping, he sits up, guy driving sees a guy in the back seat, then drives off.
Wow.
So... yeah, I mean, the idea that he might have left if they had just kept going and not pulled over.
I know. And you just think, yes, I mean, hopefully she's had a good life, but it was not her plan, was it?
No. Very sad.
Whoever it is, Murdoch or whoever, this mentality that you can do to people whatever you like, I don't understand it.
No.
Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I think that's it.
So he's still in jail?
Still in jail, gets out in 2028, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, although no body, no parole in Northern Territory. He might not get it because they've never found Peter Falconio's body.
Well, he might be able to provide material assistance, whatever their threshold test is in the Northern Territory.
He might if he was involved.
Because you don't have to find the body.
No.
To have satisfied.
But he might not, if he's not guilty, then he's not going to have any information that helps them.
No, that's right. If he's not guilty, he's locked up forever.
And so far he hasn't given them any information. So
do you know what though? I think if I was innocent but I was subject to a no body, no parole,
you'd make something up.
Yep.
You've heard it here, people. Lizzie would make it up.
What else are you going to do?
Oh, I don't know. You could proclaim your innocence and stay in jail.
And hope someone like you comes and takes a pro bono miscarriage case.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that was really interesting.
I didn't know we were going to end there. But
sorry. Yeah. And of course, law enforcement, I would never lie to you.
No. All right. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.